The criticism of Luka's conditioning predates the months before the trade, probably even predates Nico Harrison. Like, it's been there
Oh,
from the very
it
beginning.
predates his arrival in the NBA. Yes.
Yeah, it goes back a long way. What I struggled to wrap my head around, I think a lot of people in the league struggled as well, is how does the finals appearance and the way he played in the postseason not wipe all that away? Like, how do we get from Luka Doncic powering your team to
Mhm.
the NBA Finals, getting them within 3 wins of winning a championship? And look, it wasn't a competitive series against Boston, but
Right.
I mean, like, when I make a list of the reasons the Mavericks lost that series, I don't put Luka's defense as
No.
like top 5 in that list. There were a lot of reasons, like third scorer, a bunch of other things.
And Kyrie didn't have a good series.
Kyrie let Boston get into his head the first couple of games, and that was the ball game, there. So, how do we get? And what have you kind of learned about how we got from finals? We're building something. We found a combination that works. Kyrie works. Derek Lively works. All these pieces seem to work. We got to add on a third scorer. We just got to keep building around the fringes to win a championship with this as our core. How do we get, like, less than 6 months later to the point where we're like, well, we got to wash our hands of this? How do we get to that point, Tim?
Well, there are a few things. Number one, I wasn't fully aware of just how damning that Nico Harrison and some other people, but primarily Nico Harrison, really considered Luka's Game 3 performance, which is like the worst flaws. And look, Luka's flaws are as apparent as his talent. His talent outweighs the flaws, but there's as clear to see. The conditioning, sometimes the Olay style defense and the frequent petulance. And those things really bubbled to the surface at the worst possible time in a win, or we're just playing out the string game 3 on their home court in Dallas. That's the game that he fouled out of, really had a rough go of it, was ranting at the refs the whole game, commits just a silly sixth foul out on the perimeter, just on Jaylen Brown as a reaction, scream at the bench, you better effing review that, and
Like an
so
insane challenge. Like, no chance they
yeah,
were ever going to win.
and look, and then he got just obviously roasted in the media for the couple days between games and all that stuff. J Kidd made a big show of kind of publicly getting his back, but that was kind of, for all that Luka accomplished last year, I did not realize just how much the stain of that game 3 performance lingered moving forward. Again, primarily for Nico Harrison. This was Nico's call ultimately. And then, the conditioning stuff, calf strain just before training camp, although the Mavericks were misleading, to put it politely, on their reporting of that. They called it a contusion. There was a grade 1 strain. And then, he aggravates that and strains it again. It's a worse strain on Christmas. And so that's 4 calf strains, same left calf in a span of 28 months. Really a belief that the conditioning is leading to his body breaking down. And, when he strained it during camp, Luka likes to eat, throw back a brewski or twoski. And the man can pack on pounds like that. He did. And he goes into the season and, I always say it's a testament to Luka's talent that he can put up insane numbers like 29, 9, and 9 and play like crap by his standards. But that's what he did, as they stumbled off to a 5-8 start. And it was the fatigue showed up on the defensive end, in the games when they can't close games, in the shot selection. And then there was just the fraying of the relationships. And all these things are a little bit related or intertwined, but especially between Luka and Nico. Like, they did not have a relationship this year. And honestly, Nico alienated Luka by doing things like firing Casey Smith, who's as respected as any athletic trainer in the NBA. That happened in August 2023. I thought it was going to really hit the fan last year. It didn't, but it plays in everything that happened. By firing Jeremy Holsopple, their strength coach, after the finals, Casey Spangler, their longtime manual therapist, massage guy, after the finals. These are all people who were inner circle people for Luka. And I talked about Luka's loyalty. These are people he was loyal to. They were with the Mavericks before him. They helped him make this cultural transition, this massive cultural transition as a teenager from Europe who didn't know where the hell Texas was to not only America, but to the NBA. And these were his people. He didn't just like them, he didn't just know them. He trusted them, he respected them. These were his friends. And Nico fired them, replaced them with people around the organization known as Nico's guys. And yeah, there was going to be some alienation there. And it got to a point where the communication between Luka and Nico was minimal, if any. And the communication between, the Mavs front office and really the Mavs medical staff and Luka's people, his body team, and, the other people was tense and not very productive.
The other part of this is the deal itself. And historically, when we see a star player go on the trade market, maybe it's not public in the way that like Carmelo Anthony was public back in the day when the Nets and Knicks were going after him. But teams know when a guy is available and they can place a bid. The Mavericks never took that step. And a lot of that, as you've noted, is because of the relationship between Nico Harrison and Rob Pelinka, the relationship between Nico Harrison and Kobe from back in the day, from his years with Nike. I'm going to, it's an impossible hypothetical, but if Mitch Kupchak was running the Lakers and Rob Pelinka was running the Hornets, do you think that Luka Doncic would be traded to the Lakers?
So I'm going to say yes, and because the one relationship that we left out was Nico Harrison and Anthony Davis. So, when you talk about Nico's long run as an executive at Nike, obviously Kobe was his number one guy, and like he was tighter with Kobe than anybody, but AD is probably second on that list. So it got to a point, and by the way, AD also was extremely tight with Jay Kidd, who won an assistant with AD, in the bubble with the Lakers. So it wasn't just Nico saying, "Hey, we're getting out of the Luka business." It was, we're dumping Luka and we're getting my guy AD. So I think that was as important as the long relationship and trust that he had in Rob Pelinka. But yeah, they kind of vaguely sniffed around Anthony Edwards and Giannis, but it was kind of like, could you ever imagine doing like a star for star type of deal, without even like mentioning Luka's name, right? They negotiated with one team, the Lakers, and Nico was honestly very proud of how quiet they kept it, how top secret they kept it. And he did that because he didn't want to deal with the circus of the fan backlash in advance. All he did was delay that. And he felt like, he had to blindside not just Luka, but more importantly, Bill Duffy, as you know, one of the most respected agents in the game. And so what Nico did though, was he basically took away any leverage that he might have, where Pelinka convinced him, well, hey, I can't give you this 2031 pick, like 2030 swap. I got to keep those in my pocket. Like, don't connect. Like, I can't give you it all if I can't talk to Duffy. Who knows? Like, the Lakers really have a tough time, keeping players.
It's really hard to get guys to re-sign in Los Angeles for max money.
Exactly. Obviously, stripping the Supermax away, the Lakers don't have the massive financial advantage. Although I think like Jordan Brand and some other Luka sponsors aren't too sad about this trade.
They'll figure it out. Yeah.
But and Nico convinced Patrick Dumont, who is about a year into owning the franchise, to being the governor of the franchise, that a Supermax deal for Luka Doncic would be an awful investment. And the reason was the body's going to break down, the culture stuff that, they've talked about publicly, which I appreciated because, like, folks, I'm not making stuff up. This is the reasoning, like I have decent sources here. I just think that is such flawed logic because to me, if you are going to trade a guy like this, first of all, nobody of this talent at this point in their career has ever been traded unless they forced it, unless they put the proverbial gun to the franchise's head and said, hey, I'm not re-signing. Get something for me now or get nothing for me later. That wasn't the case here. Luka was 1,000% signing that supermax this summer. He was about to close on his forever home in Dallas. His American forever home. He lost the earnest money. Not that he's, we don't need to cry for him financially, but that's how committed he was. But like, dude, if you want to trade one of these guys, you want to have them locked up long term. So it doesn't matter where he wants to go. Ask Damian Lillard how much leverage you have as a player if you've got 4 years guaranteed left on your contract. How many teams were on Damian Lillard's list of preferred destinations? One. And he got the MI, but instead of MIA, it's MIL. He's a long way from South Beach, and it didn't matter. The Blazers had the leverage in those discussions because they had the guy under a long-term deal. So to me, not going through the Supermax for Luka this summer, which you had to play out this season, and then you would have had to wait another year. And if you still feel that way in a year and a half, you can put him on up to the highest bidder, have probably the most insane bidding war in NBA history. Instead, you're top secret and deflating your leverage. So I just think trading generational talent like this is always, like, I might say always because it doesn't happen. It's an extremely controversial, highly questionable move. But the process was, to me, just an extremely flawed approach if you're going to do something this drastic.
It should have fetched the greatest trade haul in NBA history. It may be in sports history, a Herschel Walker-esque trade package for a player of that caliber. And you're right, you sign him to a long-term deal, that's only going to make him more appealing to an Oklahoma City if they could get in the bidding, or a Houston if they could get in the bidding. Teams with assets and young players and all the kind of fancy things that would help this team retool, rebuild on the fly if they wanted to. The Cuban part of all this, Tim, is truly fascinating to me. Like, Cuban still owns roughly a third of the franchise?
27%.
Yeah. So he's still got a good chunk of the team. And they were able to keep all this closed hold from him as well. I mean, how were they able to do that? I mean, I understand he's not part of day-to-day basketball operations anymore, but I feel like you almost have to try hard to keep his nose out of that.
And just like they tried hard to keep his nose out of every single basketball personnel decision. I mean, seriously, Cuban very publicly made a big deal about, I'm still in charge of basketball operations, when he sold the majority share of the team. Now, what he'll tell you now is that was kind of the gentleman's agreement, and they backed out of it. The NBA wouldn't let me put it in the contract. I don't know if that's true. With Cuban, you've always got to. I wish I could have like a polygraph in my pocket with him, and with also a lot of other people. I don't know if what he's saying now is the actual truth, or if he was just completely full of it, or if he was trying to speak something into existence with the I'm in control of basketball operations. All I know is from the time the ink was dry on his deal to sell to the Adelson and Dumont families, like, he was out, and Nico was in total control. And Nico, guy who came up in corporate America, he managed up. He earned the trust and belief of Patrick Dumont, the governor. And look, he had a good trade deadline last year to get the final pieces to build a contender around this generational superstar. And not at a minimal cost. You look, they're now out 27 through 30 in first round capital in terms of their own control. Gave up a 2028 swap to get Gafford, the Oklahoma City Thunder, so they could get one of the Thunder's picks to throw at the Wizards, and gave up a 2027 top 2 protected to Charlotte to get PJ Washington. They're already out 29 for Kyrie. That's now in possession of the Houston Rockets. And they're out 30 as a swap to the Spurs to facilitate the Grant Williams sign and trade. So Nico didn't have a perfect run, but he succeeded in building that finals team, that supporting cast that's good enough to get to the finals, and had the full trust and belief and confidence of Dumont. And they are very proud of the fact that Cuban's got zero juice. Cuban has no more say than any other rich dude who's got a courtside season ticket. And Cuban got about a 5-minute heads up that this was happening, tried to talk Nico out of it. It was too late. And he got a phone call after the fact from Dumont that lasted for about 2 minutes. So, look, If Cuban's in control, there is a 0% chance that this is even a discussion. And
Mm.
honestly, like if Nico would have gone to Cuban saying we should trade Luka, I think it might have been a fireable offense. For the 5.5 years Cuban had full control of the franchise after Luka was drafted, the franchise's number one priority was kissing Luka's butt. And I would say that was a sound strategy, not always perfectly executed, because, part of kissing his butt is putting the right pieces around him. And there was certainly some whiffs there. But they went from prioritizing kissing his butt, doing everything possible to keeping him happy, to stabbing him in the back and shipping him off completely blindsided in the middle of the night on a Saturday before the trade deadline.
Cuban started out pretty quiet after the trade, and now he has proceeded to throw Molotov cocktails at the team over and over again. Gut feeling, as someone that's covered the team for a long time, do you think he's part of the ownership group in a year?
So there's like some contractual clause where they have the option to buy another 20%.
Hmm.
Um, I know like Cuban's still a hardcore Mavs fan.
Hmm.
I just know he's frustrated as hell because, just having no say and feeling like this franchise is just completely gotten away from him. So I don't know. That's a good question. Um, Selling all of his share of it would mean giving up those courtside season tickets that are right next to the bench. It means you can't eavesdrop on the huddle anymore. Not traveling to road games because the NBA won't let him sit in the second row of the bench. That stung him
Yeah.
too, by the way. And by the way,
Mm-hmm.
Cuban's not the only massive part of recent Mavericks history who's kind of been pushed out. So is Dirk. When they fired Casey Smith, Dirk's like, damn, I'm not involved in this stuff anymore. Dirk's a Mavericks fan, but where was he when Luka was making his debut for the Lakers? He's there supporting his buddy Luka. Dirk
Mm-hmm.
was also completely blindsided by this and not happy. He's made that clear.